Hello, I'm Dean Bertram, and welcome to my weird library. In my book collection behind me, there's probably at least a couple of shelves of books dedicated to the alien abduction phenomenon. Books from well-known names in the field like Whitley Strieber, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, John Mack. There's books by Raymond Fowler, Edith Fiore, Brad Steiger. There's books by skeptics on the phenomenon like Philip Klass, or people who look at it from a cultural or anthropological type perspective. Perhaps people like Joshua Cutchin. There's books which are collections of academic papers on the topic. There's books by journalists who investigated people who said they were alien abductees. In other words, there's an awful lot of books on abductions. And although I have, a couple dozen or more of those, there's hundreds and hundreds out there. Today, alien abductions, because of those books and because of obviously film and TV and other pop culture outlets, almost everybody has an understanding of what an alien abduction is. They understand it well enough to joke about being probed by aliens and the like. But it all really starts with one book and one experience within this book, and that's The Interrupted Journey, 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer by John Fuller, with a foreword by Benjamin Simon, the psychiatrist. Benjamin Simon is actually the psychiatrist who did the original hypnosis on the couple whose experience is recorded in that book, who, of course, everybody with an interest in the phenomenon probably are more than aware of, and that's Betty and Barney Hill. Now, their experience took place back in September 19 to I think the early hours of September 20 in 1961, when they were driving home from a holiday in Canada back to their home in New Hampshire through the White Mountains, where they had a rather frightening experience with what they took to be a flying saucer. And at the time, Barney believed the flying saucer was trying to capture them. Anyway, later, after troubling dreams and other issues, Betty reached out to NICAP and to the Air Force, and long story short, they eventually ended up on the couch of Benjamin Simon, who did the original, hypnoregression, as people call it now, type work. And during that hypnosis session, both Betty and Barney remembered being abducted by aliens from that flying saucer. And it's so well known, I probably don't have to go over the details particularly. But what is of real interest to me is that hidden within that book, or not so much hidden, but just not front and center, are a number of scenarios and, I suppose, passages which suggest some of the genuinely, fairly extreme psychological pressure that Barney and Betty would have been under back then in 1961, because they were an interracial couple. And at times, there weren't a whole lot of interracial couples, and it wasn't that easy being one. Barney was black and Betty was white. And in the hypnoregression, Barney, when he first describes the extraterrestrials, which originally he saw supposedly through binoculars looking at the craft even before they were abducted, the way he describes them at first is as red-headed Irishmen. And when he's questioned why he thinks they're red-headed Irishmen by the psychiatrist, he says, well, Irish people traditionally hate people of my race. And whenever I think an Irishman is going to be friendly to me, I'm particularly friendly in return. He also describes them as looking like Nazis. He says they've got Nazi-type uniforms. He actually says they're Nazis, which are obviously another grouping which he would have imagined would have been very hostile to somebody of his race. In fact, there's also mention in the book of another time that Betty and Barney Hill were driving on another lonely highway, and they were terrorized by some young teenagers, presumably going after them because of the interracial status of their marriage. There are other personal issues in there too, which kind of come to the forefront if you're paying attention. Betty, because of surgery, was unable to have children. Yet in this very first modern abduction experience. There's a very clear gynecological procedures which take place. She has a painful needle stuck into her belly, which she says was a pregnancy test, or that's what the aliens told her. Barney, although it's not in that book, supposedly after Barney's death, Betty told the alien abduction researcher David Jacobs that he had had semen taken from him. So there's all of these reproductive and gynecological tropes. It's interesting that Betty, in her description of the creatures, describes them looking like a specifically, I think the term mongoloid child might be used in the book, if I recall, but that obviously isn't politically correct or the way we would term somebody who was suffering from that kind of defect now. I think it would probably be Down syndrome or something. But she said that the extraterrestrials reminded her of that child that she worked with in her job. So there's all this underpinning of genuine, probably angst for being an interracial couple through issues of perhaps not being able to conceive a child and what that might have meant for that couple, through to, I suppose, how those things combine. And this, I'm unaware if anybody has ever mentioned this, but it's been something that's always hung around with me since my initial PhD research on it. And that is that this is where the description of grey extraterrestrials initially come from. And it just fascinates me if we're looking at the phenomenon as potentially having sociological and psychological input, which I think it does. I think there's a real, probably phenomenological base to a lot of this, but I think we as people bring our beliefs and our experiences to it as well. It's very complicated, too complicated for a short 10-minute video. But considering all of these personal issues of Betty and Barney Hill, an interracial couple, black and white, who couldn't have children, are abducted by creatures in their dreams and in the regression that they go through, or the hypnosis they go through, which are greys, which are halfway between, of course, black and white, not in an actual genuine biological, result, but in a kind of, I guess, an archetypal idea when you blend those two colors. So there was something very strange happened, I think, to the Hills. And I think even stranger was what they brought to it. And even stranger still is if somehow that initial experience manifested and mushroomed out in the broader experiential realities of UFO believers, to look back on where it all originated and what was going on with the people that really gave birth to the grey extraterrestrial. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and for listening to me today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Again, a heads up, shortly I will be moving, and it will have a co-host joining me, to another channel where my weird library will transform to a larger show, but we'll still be talking about these kind of books and trying to place them in cultural and sociological and, I suppose, psychological, significance, or look at the significance there. And until I talk to you again, please keep it weird.